The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Big Group. The aim of Big Group is very simple. We are going to try and achieve a negotiated settlement with HM Revenue and Customs for all those contractors who have used what is described as a scheme over the past 15 years. I'll come on to in a little while how we're going to achieve that. Bit of background. My name is Graham Webber. I've been a tax professional since 1976 when I joined the Revenue. I've had a very varied career, but in the last 15 years I've focused primarily on tax avoidance. My aim in that has been to deliver various schemes and to defend them against the Revenue. My company is called WTT Consulting Limited, and we are active in resolving tax inquiries. So, why do contractors need a settlement? To put it bluntly, contractors are not in a good place with the Revenue. The Revenue published in March and again in August of 2011 two spotlights. Spotlights are a way the Revenue used to bring to the public's attention certain issues they have minded to challenge. In this case, it was avoiding tax on pay and not taxing the rewards of work. The Revenue regard these spotlights as putting everybody on notice that they will challenge certain schemes. In addition, there have been changes in legislation pretty much every year since 2004, following the ill-fated introduction of IR35. There's been a number of cases in court. The only case in court that is finally decided so far is called Philip Boyle, and I'll come back to that in a second. The facts there, suffice to say, are very specific. The Revenue are in an active campaign here. They have issued inquiry notices, they've issued discovery assessments, they've issued something called a COP8, and more recently they've issued an accelerated payment notice requiring payment of tax and dispute up front. I'll cover APNs here as it's convenient to do so. Big Group does not specifically look after APN action. Big Group has published a list of how an APN can be appealed against, although appeal in this sentence isn't exactly true, it's more representation. And those public details can be used to make a representation. Other groups active in this area think that a judicial review of the APN system is sensible. I have to say that we think it is not sensible, we think it's expensive and is unlikely to succeed. This is especially the case as the Revenue regard the penalty for not paying an APN, which could be as high as 15%, will still be payable even if a judicial review is subsequently held to be effective or ineffective. As I say, our advice really is to try and pay the APN if possible, even if this means over time. WTT Consulting Limited will discuss with you how an APN representation can be made, but that is an additional cost to Big Group. Presently, the Revenue are offering a settlement for contractors. This alleges that it will give you a final figure of tax due in respect of all taxes for all periods in which you used the scheme. Our reading of the letters that come out with this settlement is that there are a number of holes. In particular, it's very unclear as to whether the Revenue will tax only those years that are validly open for assessment and adjustment. The Revenue reserve unto themselves additional taxes such as inheritance tax and national insurance, which may come up in the future. They don't always use the numbers that are published in the returns. They have a habit of using estimates. And the whole process needs very careful checking and cooperation. The revenue are known to make a number of errors here. However, it is our belief that anybody interested should register for a settlement by the end of June. The revenue then promised to have these settlement figures ready by the end of September. We think it's more likely to be later in the year than that. And then once checked, which is something Big Group will do, it is a process of deciding whether to take it or not. We happen to think at the moment most of these will be incorrect, but if that error is in your favour, then it may be in your interest to accept it. Most likely by the end of the year, the settlement offer will be closed. Dealing with the revenue is difficult. The revenue are dogmatic in their style, they're very stubborn. They can be evasive in some areas because information doesn't filter down to the right person at the right time. They can be hard to get hold of. I'm sure you've all experienced waiting on the phone for them for many hours. They are not the most organised of people. In particular, you will find that those teams dealing with accelerated payment notices and those teams dealing with your case tend to be different. This can lead to confusion and incorrect figures, all to be corrected at your time and expense. So it's not easy dealing with them, and once they have the bit between their teeth, they are reluctant to move. A negotiated settlement of these schemes involved, therefore, is a valid alternative to both the settlement offer and potential litigation, which I'll discuss in a while. Over the 15 years since the year 2000, there have been a number of schemes. We estimate between 40 and 50, but they tend to fall into three, arguably four types. Those shared features mean that these schemes are vulnerable to the same revenue attack, but they're also susceptible to the same counter-arguments. And one of the aims of Big Group is to identify and pull from each of the providers and action groups who are fighting these claims the very best of the arguments, and to add to those new principles and arguments being developed in other anti-avoidance cases in order to create an alternative analysis. It's likely that each of these will involve 2 or 3 alternative analyses, and these will be tried against the revenue. Once the current settlement offer closes, as I've said, register by the end of June, it's unlikely another settlement will be offered unless and until a case is heard. We know that the Murray Group case is going to be heard perhaps later this year. We know there are a couple of other cases involving employment benefit trusts used for payment of bankers' bonuses going to Supreme Court, and that may reach the court this year as well. Decisions in the early or mid part of 2016 are likely. We know that the first mass marketed contractor scheme is likely to be in court towards the end of next year. A decision on that one perhaps in mid-2017. Therefore, there's a window of opportunity. There's a window in which Big Group can convince the revenue that they have a problem which is going to absorb a lot of their resources and a lot of their time and effort, but also a problem that can be solved with the application of some common sense and by listening to these alternative analyses. We would warn at this point that the political rhetoric around tax avoidance is, as you might imagine, quite rabid and at times not entirely sensible. Whether it is rhetoric and whether it is susceptible to sensible conclusion remains to be seen, but we would think that the revenue under their new management, i.e. the Conservative Party, will be sensible in this issue. Once we reach a position where a settlement is going to be offered, it'll be offered via a contract settlement. That is a private arrangement between the taxpayer and the revenue. It is not available to everybody else who uses the scheme. It's not available to anybody else who wants to claim the same terms but who hasn't actually paid the big scheme fees. At that point, all members of the big group will be offered the contract settlement. There is no obligation to accept it. If you still feel at that point that a better deal can be had, you're perfectly at liberty to decline and to move forward with other matters. The key to big group is numbers. Numbers enables the group to have more weight with the revenue. It enables collection of significant sums of money to be used for litigation, if necessary in part, and to support other areas. It enables us to acquire the services of professionals who will be required in this area in order to provide big group members with a whole life solution. It's not enough here to resolve the tax issue only. We also have to resolve what happens to the trust, what happens to the loans. It may well be that insolvency issues come into this as well, and they will need to be advised upon. Please bear in mind the big group is a tax-focused group, and if any of these areas require specialist professional input, that will be an additional cost. Big group will be entering into a press campaign. In fact, has already started. This is aimed at capturing hearts and minds and seeks to replicate the Revenue's very successful campaign, which has prejudiced the public opinion against tax avoiders. Contractors, in our view, are not tax avoiders. They are unwitting victims of other parties. Big group wants a progressive relationship with the Revenue. Many providers have a very aggressive attitude towards the Revenue, and whilst that has its place, it is not what Big Group wants to do. It wants a progressive and a constructive arrangement with the Revenue. How long will this process take? It's very difficult to say. We are estimating between 5 and 7 years for the initial tranche of schemes, and for later schemes as they come onto the market, perhaps a few years beyond that. It's quite difficult to say. We know in the film world, for example, that some schemes are just coming to court now, some 10 to 12 years after they were started. How much does it cost? Joining Big Group between now and the end of this year costs £50 plus VAT. In addition, there's a monthly fee of £15 plus VAT that will continue until the campaign is resolved. You can leave at any time. There is no notice period required, but any fees paid to that point will not be refunded. If you choose to join after the end of this year, your joining fees and potentially your monthly fees will be increased. This is to discourage people joining at the last moment and taking advantage of everybody else's work. Will it work? I can't guarantee that. I wish I could, but I can't. There's no guarantee the Revenue will listen to a negotiated settlement. There's no guarantee they will win or lose at litigation. There's no guarantee a new settlement will be offered. Sensible and commercial is what we hope will happen, and that will bring the Revenue to the table, and we will be doing our utmost to do that. Can you be a member of Big Group and your own action group? Simple answer is yes. Big Group has a negotiated settlement in its sights. Most action groups are either focused upon litigation or some form of settlement with the Revenue through official means. Where your group is involved in litigation, then it's very sensible to join Big Group because that gives you another option. Will we deal with all schemes, up to and including current ones? Yes, we will. The only proviso there being that later schemes sometimes require the application of rules regarding DOTAS, i.e. disclosure of tax avoidance schemes. Some of that can be quite tricky, but we are looking at that as well. If the case is that this needs more intense work, then we may consider bringing additional charges for those schemes. If we do, that will be notified in advance and there will be no retrospective charging. We regard Big Group as an effective alternative to litigation. Litigation is expensive and uncertain, very expensive. The current settlement offer is, in our view, unfair. It doesn't give you a final settlement. It's very unclear as to what it's going to do. Doing nothing is not an option. If you put your head in the sand under this issue and do nothing, then the revenue will simply apply their interpretation of events and you'll have no choice but to pay the tax. Hopefully that's given you a very quick view of what Big Group is, what it hopes to achieve, who I am, who my company are. We are very firm believers in this process. We are very much committed to providing this at a reasonable price. We are not asking for funds up front, but equally we're not guaranteeing success, although we have every expectation of delivering such. We do have a private forum. This is available to members in which questions can be asked and shared or asked and kept personal. There are various contractor forums around the marketplace to which we contribute and to which we will continue to contribute. We do act for other individuals, but as I said, this is an additional price. I would urge you to think very carefully about joining Big Group. We believe it's by far the most cost-effective solution to the unfortunate issues you have at the moment, and we look forward to welcoming you on board in due course. Thank you for listening.